On April 14, 2026, Seattle's mayor stood in front of a university auditorium, laughed, waved her hand, and said this about millionaires leaving her city. And if the ones that leave, like, bye, the crowd whooped. She grinned. The clip hit 4 million views in a week. 16 days earlier. Not 16 months. 16 days. Her own budget office had quietly sent a memo to every city department asking them to prepare cuts of between 5 and 10%. She was mocking the exodus in public. She was already preparing for its consequences behind closed doors. And the man she was effectively waving goodbye to, he just published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal calling her a disaster. On the same day, his company cut another 61 jobs in Seattle. This is that story. And by the end of this video, you're going to see exactly why it's not just Seattle's problem. Now I know what you're thinking, mate. I don't live in Seattle. Why do I care about some American mayor and a coffee bloke? Here's why. Because the exact same playbook this mayor is running. Tax the wealthy. Harder. Dismiss the warnings. Watch the tax base quietly disappear. Then scramble to explain the budget hole isn't confined to the Pacific Northwest. It's the same maths that's driving families out of Sydney into Brisbane and the Gold Coast right now. It's the same maths behind Australia's Division 296 super tax, which taxes unrealized gains on balances above $3 million. It's the same maths that every government eventually has to face when it decides ideology matters more than arithmetic. Seattle is not a cautionary tale from far away. It's a preview, and the preview is running in real time with documented numbers attached to every step. What happened there over the last 60 days is the clearest case study we've had in years of what actually happens when a city picks a fight with the people funding it. So let's go through it properly. Let's start in Brooklyn, 1953. A kid grows up in a federally subsidized housing project called Bayview Houses. About 150 families crammed into one building. His father drives cabs, delivers parcels, works factories. Then, in the winter of 1961, his dad slips on ice delivering nappies, breaks his ankle, loses the job, loses the family's health insurance. The same week, his mother is 7 months pregnant. There's no safety net. There's nothing. That kid gets himself a football scholarship, becomes the first person in his family to graduate from university, takes a sales job, and in 1982, flies out to Seattle to look at a tiny coffee company with 5 stores that was buying more drip filters than Macy's. He joined Starbucks on September 7, 1982. He turned it into the largest coffee chain on earth, over 40,000 locations worldwide. And critically, because of what he watched happen to his own father, he made Starbucks the first major American company to give part-time workers health insurance. That man is Howard Schultz, and he stayed in Seattle for 44 years. Now hold that story in your head while I tell you what Seattle's new mayor did the first week after she won the election. November 13, 2025. Mayor-elect Katie Wilson, self-described Democratic Socialist, stood on a picket line outside the Starbucks Reserve Roastery on Capitol Hill and told the crowd, and I'm quoting her directly, "I am not buying Starbucks, and you should not either." That was her introduction to the business community she was about to lead. March 3, 2026. Starbucks announces a brand new corporate office in Nashville, Tennessee, a $100 million investment, up to 2,000 workers, over 5 years, moving south. 1 week later, on March 10th, the same day, Washington state legislators passed the millionaire tax. Howard Schultz posts on LinkedIn that he and his wife Sherry are leaving Seattle for Miami. After 44 years, he paid $44 million for a penthouse at a Four Seasons development in Surfside, Florida, and his private family office made the move with him. The millionaire tax, by the way, is a 9.9% income tax on households earning over $1 million a year. Washington state had never had an income tax in its history. Voters rejected it 10 times. since the 1930s. The most recent rejection was 2010. It failed 64% to 36%. In 2024, voters passed an initiative that literally banned new statewide income taxes. The legislature just did it anyway. They built in a specific clause blocking a voter referendum to overturn it. The public was never going to get to vote on this. That's the detail nobody's headline has emphasized. The effective top rate on wages and stock units in Seattle is now asterisk 18.037%, the highest of any major city in the United States, higher than New York, higher than Chicago, higher than Los Angeles. And that's the environment Katie Wilson looked at on April 14th, stood in front of an auditorium and said bye to the people leaving it. The clip went everywhere. 4 million views in a week, and the reactions that matter aren't the conservative commentators piling on. You'd expect that. The reactions that matter are the ones coming from Wilson's own side. Reuven Carlyle is a Democrat, former Washington state legislator. He went on record and said this: Seattle does not have an inherent constitutional right to a vibrant, high-tech-driven economy. It has to be earned daily. Your apparent enthusiasm for destructive anti-business, anti-entrepreneur rhetoric is harmful to jobs, taxes, and quality of life. A Democrat, publicly, to a fellow Democrat, on record. And then there's Nick Hanauer. This is the one that should genuinely stop you. Hanauer is the billionaire who personally bankrolled the campaign to pass Washington's capital gains tax. He funded the progressive tax framework that Wilson now runs on. He's the architect of the ideology she's implementing. He told GeekWire this: virtually every wealthy friend I have has either left or is planning to. It's a catastrophe. The man who built the house just called it a catastrophe. And then, on May 12, 2026, the same day Starbucks disclosed it was cutting another 61 jobs in Seattle, Schultz published his Wall Street Journal op-ed. The title was, "Seattle Turns Hostile to the Great Businesses It Made." He wrote, Seattle's mayor, Katie Wilson, has chosen to cast business as a foil rather than a partner. Her socialist rhetoric vilifies employers, even while she continues to rely on them for revenue. She has encouraged residents who disagree with her policies to leave. And then this line, which is a line that summarizes the entire economic misunderstanding at the heart of the story. The theory appears to be that prosperity can be mandated through redistribution rather than generated through growth. Seattle tech investor Chris DeVore put it less diplomatically. He posted, "Seattle is so theft when the person running the city doesn't understand that all jobs and tax revenue come from private employers. Driving employers away permanently hollows out her capacity to pay for her social programs." That's not a right-wing blogger. That's the tech community that built the city's economy saying the quiet part out loud. Wilson's office didn't respond to Schultz's op-ed. The silence is its own kind of answer. Here's what the mainstream coverage is missing. And this is important. Every story about this frames it as billionaire versus socialist mayor, wealthy guy upset about taxes versus principled leaders standing up to the rich. That framing is not wrong exactly, but it's incomplete, and the incomplete version lets Wilson off the hook for something she absolutely should be on the hook for. The buy wave happened on April 14th. Her office sent the budget cut memo on March 28th, 16 days earlier. She wasn't being principled. She was performing confidence she demonstrably didn't feel. Because 16 days before she laughed at the exodus on stage, she was privately asking every department to prepare for cuts of 5 to 10% to close a budget gap she was publicly dismissing. That's not courage. That's theater, and the audience are the people of Seattle who are about to pay for it. Seattle's budget deficit is projected at between $125 million and $140 million for 2027. By 2029, that gap could grow past $300 million. That's city level. At the state level, Washington is staring at a $4.3 billion deficit for the 2027 to 2029 period, and that's just to maintain current services before any new spending, before any new programs. Meanwhile, 1 in 3 downtown Seattle office spaces is sitting empty. The vacancy rate hit between 34.7 and 35.6%, one of the highest in any major U.S. city, according to Cushman and Wakefield. Amazon moved thousands of jobs across the lake to Bellevue. Microsoft and Oracle layoffs stripped another 20,000 jobs from the region, and the number of businesses considering leaving Washington has nearly doubled since the millionaire tax was introduced. Nearly doubled. That's from the Association of Washington Businesses. Not a conservative think tank. The people doing the business are the ones reporting the number. Here's the cycle that nobody in City Hall will say out loud. Tax base shrinks because the wealthy leave. Deficit grows. City needs more revenue. Rates go up. The next wave of employers does the maths and decides Tennessee. Tax base shrinks again. Deficit grows again. And the only people left to tax are the ones who can't afford to leave. We've seen this play out in New York over 12 years. Seattle is doing it in 12 months. The Washington Policy Center ran the Starbucks Nashville numbers. Over the course of a 23-year lease, Starbucks will save a minimum of $250 million by being in Nashville instead of Seattle. $250 million for one company over one lease? That's not a rounding error. That's a documented consequence of a specific policy choice sitting in a spreadsheet available to anyone who wants to look at it. Wilson looked at that spreadsheet and waved. Right back to us. Sydney is losing residents to Queensland at a rate that hasn't been seen in decades. Brisbane and the Gold Coast are absorbing families who've done the same maths as Starbucks and arrived at the same answer. Same lifestyle, 20 to 30% less on the house, more money in the pocket at the end of the month. This isn't identical to Seattle. Australia's states don't levy their own income taxes the way Washington just did. The federal structure is different, but the underlying logic is identical. When the cost of staying gets high enough and the quality of life gap narrows enough, people and businesses move, and when they move, the secondary economy moves with them. The cafe near the Starbucks corporate building doesn't care whether it closed because of ideology or arithmetic. It just closes. And here's the one that directly hits Australians with serious savings. Division 296, the new super tax, applying to balances above $3 million, taxing unrealized gains annually. That's the Seattle playbook with an Australian accent. The argument is the same. It only hits the wealthy. It's fair. The threat that people will restructure or leave is overblown. The Seattle data says it isn't overblown. The Seattle data says when you make staying expensive enough, the people with options find their options. Here's the flip side, though, and this is actually useful for Australians who are paying attention. We're currently on the receiving end of global wealth migration. The UK is set to lose over 16,500 millionaires this year. Americans are watching their major cities deteriorate. Wealthy people are looking for somewhere stable, English-speaking, well-governed, and sane about tax policy. Australia still checks most of those boxes. The question isn't whether we're Seattle yet. The question is whether we're watching Seattle closely enough to avoid becoming it. Because the warning isn't buried in some academic report. It's in a LinkedIn post, a Wall Street Journal op-ed, and a 3-second video of a mayor waving at the camera and laughing. Here's the takeaway I want you to leave with. Howard Schultz didn't leave Seattle because he hated it. He left because the maths changed. 44 years of loyalty, built on a genuine story, real jobs, real health insurance for real workers, and the maths changed. Full stop. And the mayor waved. On stage, in front of a cheering crowd, while her budget office was already privately preparing for what comes next. That's not a story about a billionaire and a socialist. That's a story about what happens when a city decides that the feelings behind a policy matter more than the consequences of it. When performance replaces arithmetic. When buy feels better, then please stay. The consequences don't care about your feelings. They just arrive. Starbucks is saving $250 million in Nashville. 2,000 jobs are heading to Tennessee. Seattle's vacancy rate is touching 35%. The deficit is growing every year, and the man who gave that city 44 years just published a Wall Street Journal op-ed calling it hostile. There's a version of this story where the mayor reads the budget memo on March 28th and thinks, maybe I should govern differently. Maybe I should treat the people funding this city as partners rather than enemies. Maybe the wave is a bad idea. She didn't take that version, she took the other one. And now the city gets to live with the maths she dismissed. If this kind of analysis is useful to you, the stuff that's documented, sourced, and sitting in plain sight, but nobody's connecting the dots on, hit subscribe. The algorithm only shows this to people who are actually engaged with it. So subscribing genuinely helps. I'll keep doing the research, so you don't have to. See you in the next one.